Any Stephen King fan knows the name The Arrowhead Project by heart. The unimaginable horrors that this particular project has supposedly unleashed on the people in his story The Mist have definitely left a mark on us readers. But what is the Arrowhead Project? What is Thinny? And how does it work to bring the horrors of this separate Todash Space into our Earth? Well, if it's something you guys are curious about, then look no further. Today, we at Marvelous Videos are gonna dive deep into this top-secret military experiment and unravel how human curiosity unleashed an otherworldly recklessness in a small town. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Exploring the Arrowhead Project. Key insights. When it comes to understanding the vast lore that Stephen King has created for us cosmic horror fans, we have to start off at the very beginning. The Arrowhead Project. So what is it? Well, to put it simply, it's a military experiment. This project is performed in Shaymore, and the main goal of this project is dimensional travel. Well, to be more precise, they wanted to create a window between our dimension and the other dimensions, allowing us to catch a glimpse of what lies beyond. The masterminds behind this project are assumed to be the organization known as the Shop. I know, the name doesn't invoke fear or worry at all, but this agency is actually the Department of Scientific Intelligence. This secret government agency shows up in Firestarter as the one who conducted experiments with the chemical Lot 6. Similarly, we see the Shop show up again in the Tommy Knockers right after the incident in Haven, Maine. The Shop is also mentioned in The Stand, yet another classic work of Stephen King. So, of course, a lot of fans have speculated about the involvement of the Shop in the transgressions that took place in The Mist. Apparently, the Arrowhead Project was operated on the 17th of July, 1980. When the experiment was happening, a massive electrical storm happened near the town of Bridgeton. Since this facility used all the power sources from Maine, the electrical system quickly overloaded. Right in front of the eyes of the scientists, a huge portal opened. However, before they could rejoice in the so-called success of their experiment, the grim reality of the situation sank in. The portal was expanding, and sure enough, all sorts of grotesque creatures started stepping out of the portal, filling up the tank along with the dense mist. As you can guess, this was not ideal at all. Eventually the tank broke, and all the creatures, along with the mist, spread all over the place, slowly making their way over to Bridgeton, which was not very far away from Shaymore. Stephen King, being the absolutely amazing storyteller he is, never actually comes forward in his writing and tells us that it is actually the Arrowhead that caused the rift. However, it's heavily implied in his writing, with several clues strewn about the story that fans can definitely catch on to. The involvement of Project Arrowhead almost became canon though, when it came to the 2007 film. Frank Darabont, the director of the movie, had been a Stephen King fan for a really long time, and when he got his hands on the project, he wanted to include a prologue scene that would have explicitly stated how the Mist came to be. While this is what we get in The Mist, we can always look at King's other classic, the Dark Tower series of novels, to get a better idea. I know what you guys are thinking. How can the Dark Tower series connect with The Mist, right? Well, let's look at it this way. In the Dark Tower series, we learn about the Todash Space and the Thinny. Like so many fans, if we take these two things and put them in perspective of the happenings in The Mist, it would make complete sense where all the creatures came from. Now you might be wondering about Todash and Thinny, right? Well, let me explain them to you one by one. Exploring the Great Beyond, Todash Space. When it comes to the Stephen King universe, Todash Space is described as this vast span of nothingness. Just imagine a great big void, and I think that would be an accurate imagination of the Todash Space. It exists between the alternate universes in the metaverse. Given the way the Todash Space is placed, you would have to cross it every time you want to travel interdimensionally. It's usually used as a method of fast travel, but you have to be very careful about it because otherwise you might not make it back to your reality. I'm sure that as a horror fan, the Todash Space serves as a reminder of yet another vast expanse like that. Yes, folks, we're talking about the Plateau of Ling. Created by none other than the god of horror himself, H.P. Lovecraft, the Plateau of Ling can be considered as a way station between dimensions. It's between the worlds and the innumerable universes around it. Creatures would often use this plateau to go to the material realm, mostly by accident, but sometimes it was pretty intentional. All of these creatures from the Plateau of Ling are infamous for being the most terrifying unknown creatures. The similarities are pretty evident, right? So if I had to bet, I would say that the Todash Space is very much like the Plateau of Ling. It's something absolutely horrifying and bone-chilling. I'm sure all of you know about the door underneath the Castle Discordia. That door led to the Todash Space in a jiffy. The people who made this door, the old ones, often considered this door to be a mistake. However, Crimson King disagreed. He made full use of the door to punish his enemies, forcing them to live out their remaining days in the vast expanse of nothingness, blind and deaf, until a gruesome monster killed them. As for the monsters that lurk in the Todash Space, the best example would be that one time a monster ended up in the tunnel between Castle Discordia and Feedic. This demon almost managed to kill Susanna and Roland. Luckily, they had sterno-fueled torches, which helped them fend it off. When it comes to the Mist, there's a little bit of controversy regarding the origin of the monsters we see there. While King has never confirmed anything, fans have worked relentlessly to figure out where the creatures of the Mist showed up from. At first, they thought it was the Todash Space itself. However, the Todash monsters we learn about in the Dark Tower series are described to be unearthly horrors. However, if you look at the monsters in the Mist, they simply look like creatures from the alien ecosystem. This led to a lot of debate amongst the fans, some even going as far as to claim that maybe the creatures are from the Wastelands and not the Todash Space. Personally, I feel that it could just be that the creatures we see are not from the Wastelands either. Maybe they're from a world that's beyond these two, and was using the Todash Space to travel, only to step in through the Thinny when the opportunity presented itself. The Todash Space might seem like just a part of the Dark Tower series, but if you look closely into Stephen King's work, you will find Todash Space mentioned or implied several times. I believe Todash Space plays a bigger role than we think it does. For example, it could just be that the macroverse we see ruled by it and Maturin is actually related to Todash Space. When it comes to Tommyknockers, the empty channels that are used for other space teleportation could also be related to the Todash Space. If you look at from a Buick 8, you will see the connections between the dimension Buick opens to and the Todash Space. Since the true nature of the Buick is never explained, this connection too, like the others, has been left up for speculation. While all of these connections I've just mentioned are simply speculations or guesses on the fans' part, I have to admit, these connections truly make Stephen King's universe seem much more terrifying than it already is. Thinny, the blurred lines between dimensions. Interdimensional travel sounds all fun and dandy until you start thinking about it realistically. Dimensions are notorious for not being rigid objects, so of course there would be pulling and pushing. So what happens when the fabric of the world has been stretched thin at certain spots? Well, that is known as Thinny. This is the weak spot where the fabric of reality is not as strong as it should be. So now the question is, what does a Thinny look like? Thanks to the Dark Tower series, we know that these Thinnies look like big blobs of mercury. They're almost alive at first glance, all bubbling and goopy. They're also known to make warbling noises that almost sound musical to the ears. If you hear that sound, you better run away, because these sounds can hypnotize you or put you on high alert. Either way, you're going to go insane. Not only that, the Thinny also starts putting thoughts into the heads of people near it, making them almost reach a very calm state, even though they're walking to their deaths. Now, given the nature of Thinny, technically speaking, you could use it as a mode of transportation, but you have to be very careful about how you do it. In the Dark Tower series, we see Eddie Dean, Roland Deschain, Jake Chambers, Oi, and Susanna Holmes all manage to escape Lud by traveling through a Thinny. This Thinny took them to a parallel world that was completely overrun by the superflu. When Roland was walking up the interstate highway in Topeka, Kansas, he talked about the time he saw a Thinny near the barony of Medjez. Morgan Sloat from Talisman was also shown to be someone who can create a Thinny. He has a magic key that can create a rift between Keystone Earth and the Territories, much like the Thinny. Jack Sawyer often described the phenomenon as similar to looking through a glass window stained with dirty stain. While that sounds pretty similar to a Thinny, the sounds he described do not. According to Sawyer, whenever Morgan created these rifts, a loud ripping sound could be heard that just kept rising and rising without stopping. If we were to assume that this too is a Thinny, then I think we can all conclude that there are different types of Thinnies all over the Stephen King universe, and the variance between any two Thinnies is based on the sound that we hear. And as for Bridgeton, Maine, I think we can all agree that the Arrowhead Project created a massive Thinny at the Shaymore base, which led to the mist and monsters running free all over the small town. That's how David Drayton and his son ended up getting trapped in the grocery store. Why the Mist and Arrowhead Project exemplifies the cosmic horror mastery. Cosmic horror has to be one of the most underrated subgenres of horror. While body horror, serial killers, etc. are pretty mainstream, none of them can grab you by the throat the way cosmic horror does. Stephen King manages to encapsulate the fear of the unknown, the unsettling ideas of forces beyond human comprehension, and the general insignificance of humanity in the vast expanse of the universe pretty well with his masterful novella, The Mist. I think one of the most horrifying parts of the whole Arrowhead Project and the Mist setting is just how unexplainable everything was. The scientists at Shaymore were taking power from the main power grid to ensure they could carry out their experiments in peace. No one expected there to be a sudden electrical storm, and no one actually even considered the power load to cause the Thinny. But it happened, and soon enough, there was this mysterious dense mist and abominable creatures making their way out of it. Whether or not the portal connected the Shaymore base of Project Arrowhead to Todash Space is up for speculation. However, the concept implies that there is a whole world out there that the characters and the readers know nothing about, forcing all of us to be in this perpetual state of anxiety and uncertainty. Once the creatures stepped out, there was no way to explain their existence. These creatures are bigger than anything that we have ever seen, and more vicious than any animal we've ever encountered, which truly puts into perspective just how fragile and small we are as humans in the grand scheme of things. The characters struggle against the monsters in the novella, which serves as a reminder of how helpless and powerless we truly are. Since these animals or creatures are so alien, it fills us, the readers and the characters, with a terror of the inexplicable, which is extremely fascinating. The mist, at first glance, simply looks like a dense fog. However, the way it becomes a malevolent entity is just absolutely terrifying to watch. The Lovecraftian terrors that awaited the characters in the depths of the mist also up the ante as our characters struggle to survive in the supermarket. These creatures have different vocal noises than the animals we're familiar with, giving them a certain edge over us. Similarly, we do not know at first glance if the monsters can see the characters or if they're simply blind because of the dense mist. The lack of ideas about the behavioral patterns of the creatures definitely makes the whole cosmic horror aspect of the story rather fear-inducing. The greatest part of any cosmic horror novel has to be how it interweaves the concepts of existential dread with the reality of survival. In The Mist, the characters do not even know if they will be able to go home. They do not know if the mist will ever recede, which would take away the one safe haven that they had, their homes. Now, trapped in the supermarket, we see the group effectively act as a microcosm of society, with anxiety, dread, rage, and religion all mixed in. The horrifying aspects of The Mist are not just the monsters that are outside the supermarket, but also the monsters we find amongst the people inside the supermarket. Whether you're a new Stephen King fan or an OG one, I think the connection of The Mist and the Dark Tower and Todash Space adds a new layer of mystery and cosmic horror to his books. The fact that there is a dimension right next to us which is ready to rip us apart whenever there's a Thinny definitely has me scared. The implication of the Todash Space monsters implies that there could be worse monsters lurking just beyond our perception, and that amplifies the cosmic horror aspect of the novel. King's inspiration: grocery aisle to cosmic horror. Given how absolutely terrifying the premise of The Mist and the Arrowhead Project as a whole happens to be, it's only natural to think where Mr. King got his inspiration from. Well, as it turns out, it was nothing complicated at all. Stephen King mentioned previously in many interviews that he got the idea about The Mist when he was out in Bridgeton, Maine. He was with his son and was grocery shopping. While there, he thought about the sudden thunderstorm that had rolled in. There was some mist after the sudden electrical storm, and King found it fascinating. By the time he reached the counter, he already knew he wanted to set the story in an enclosed space like a grocery store, which would be surrounded by this otherworldly mist that was far too dense and dangerous for anyone to step foot in. As for the Arrowhead Project, King has always been fascinated with secret government programs and experiments that have gone wrong. Especially right after the Cold War and Vietnam, stories about these kinds of shady military operations with unintended consequences were floating around rampantly. King decided to take the anxiety that everyone felt hearing about these secret organizations and put it into words by creating Arrowhead. The Arrowhead Project scares the fans in two very distinct ways. One is the most obvious one, as in the government crossing boundaries and doing inhumane things just because they can. The other one is the dangers of human curiosity. There's nothing wrong with being curious, but when do you know if your curiosity is going to be the death of you and others around you? That's right, you don't. How is that not the most horrifying thing? The Mist, adaptation done right. Since we've been talking about the Mist novella, it would be a crime not to talk about the fantastic film that we got in 2007 by none other than Frank Darabont. Frank Darabont is the mastermind who brought previous works of King's to the big screen and did them justice. After his fantastic adaptations of Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile, Darabont finally managed to get his hands on the one project he had been wanting to work on for decades: The Mist. Bringing cosmic horror to the screen is not a feat anyone can easily master, but somehow Frank Darabont managed to get it right. At first, he wanted to give a very obvious prologue scene in the movie, marking Arrowhead Project's role in the catastrophe that followed in Bridgeton. However, the prologue scene never made it to the final cut, because Darabont wanted to keep the suspense that King portrayed in his work. Adaptations are infamous for making changes in the story that make the whole experience worse, right? But not Darabont. He figured out what key points he needed to change, so that fans of the book and the ones who have never read the book both feel the dread that the original novel wanted to convey, but in a more visceral way. The big change from the novella is the bleak ending of the movie. The way the last scene portrays the nihilism and the burden of the decision that our main protagonist took truly is something unforgettable. Thanks to CGI, the movie was able to capture the essence of monsters outside the human realm that King wanted to portray, and both of these changes were very much liked by Stephen King. He also enjoyed that Darabont made sure to give Mrs. Carmody, the religious zealot, more screen time, which upped the ante in the microcosm that was the supermarket. Marvelous verdict. As much as we love feeling like the smartest animals on this planet, there's no guarantee that we're going to be the smartest everywhere we go. The idea of being just as helpless as an ant in front of some eldritch horror is what makes cosmic horror such an amazing subgenre of horror. Project Arrowhead, Todash Space, and Thinny. All of these might be Stephen King's creations, but let's be real. We don't know if it is actually happening or not. Maybe there's a Project Arrowhead happening somewhere right now, and we won't know about it until something awful happens. Conspiracy theories aside, let us know in the comments what you guys think about the Arrowhead Project, and if you guys think the monsters in the mist were from Todash Space or Wastelands. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone!